With Season 3 of The Bad Batch set to premiere next month, February 21st, 2024, as the final season, and potentially marking the end of the Clone Wars era and Clone Wars stories in animation, I want to talk about the Untold Clone Wars arcs, their adaptations, and the future of Clone Wars storytelling in general. Before we get into the video, welcome back to my channel. My name is Scotty Holiday, I'm a queer creator and a huge Star Wars nerd, so if you're into either one of those things, please consider liking, subscribing, and following me on social media at Scotty Holiday SW for all my latest Star Wars content. Star Wars The Clone Wars is an animated series created by George Lucas and creative director Dave Filoni, set between the events of Star Wars Episode 2 and Star Wars Episode 3. The show began with a theatrical film in 2008 and ran for 6 seasons until its cancellation in 2013 following Disney's acquisition of Lucasfilm, but was eventually revived 7 years later for a final 7th season in 2020. At the time of the show's cancellation, Dave Filoni has stated that they had at least 8 seasons of content planned for the show, with Season 6 getting a Netflix release the following year in 2014, and other unfinished arcs going on to be released in various comics and novels as a part of the Clone Wars Legacy multimedia project. Since this project began, we've seen characters created for the Clone Wars series show up in various other animated shows, games, books, and comics, with some even making the jump to live action in Rogue One, The Mandalorian, Book of Boba Fett, and Ahsoka. The Bad Batch is literally a spin-off series from the Clone Wars, even going as far as using the same distinct animation style, which is also used for another new Star Wars animated anthology series, Tales of the Jedi. Because of the Clone Wars Legacy multimedia project, we know of at least 12 different story arcs that were in progress at the time of the series cancellation. So between the video released on StarWars.com and YouTube about the project, plus the different Clone Wars Untold panels from Star Wars Celebration 2015 and 2016, the big 3 arcs that probably come to mind when mentioning the Clone Wars Untold tales are Son of Dathomir, Crystal Crisis on Utapau, and Dark Disciple. Son of Dathomir, originally intended for the Clone Wars Season 7 as a 4-episode arc, continued Maul's story from his defeat and capture by Darth Sidious following the events of Season 5 Episode 16, The Lawless. This arc would have seen Sidious use Maul's capture to draw out Mother Talzin, leader of the Night Sisters, from hiding since he considered her a potential threat to the Sith Grand Plan. The arc would see Maul eventually escape with the help of his Mandalorian allies, take on the Separatists, and end in a climactic duel between himself and Mother Talzin versus General Grievous, Count Dooku, and Darth Sidious on Dathomir. Using the scripts from this unfinished arc, Son of Dathomir was eventually released as a 4-issue comic miniseries in 2014. What I feel is most important about this Clone Wars arc is explaining how Maul went from his defeat and capture at the hands of Sidious back to ruling Mandalore in Season 7. This arc also provides us with closure for Mother Talzin and explains why we never see her again outside of the Clone Wars series, plus giving us further context into Talzin's relationship with the Sith and Darth Sidious, which precedes the events of The Phantom Menace. Crystal Crisis on Utapau was also originally intended for Season 7 of the Clone Wars as a 4-episode arc, this time following Anakin and Obi-Wan on a mission to investigate the mysterious death of a Jedi Master on Utapau. During their investigation, they uncover a secret Separatist weapons deal involving a giant Kyber crystal and make it their mission to escape with the crystal before General Grievous and his droid army arrive. While the arc itself feels like your typical Clone Wars arc, the second episode would have seen Anakin finally discuss Ahsoka's decision to leave the Jedi Order with Obi-Wan, chastising the Jedi Council's decision to not stand by her during her trial, and ultimately causing her to leave the Order altogether. At the end of their discussion, Anakin asks Obi-Wan, "How would you feel if I turned into a major disappointment? How well would you sleep knowing I failed you?" This discussion is what makes this arc such a standout of the Untold arcs, specifically because it's the first time we would have seen Anakin open up about Ahsoka's decision to leave since they parted ways at the end of Season 5. This arc would have ultimately made their reunion in Season 7 hit even harder than it already did as well. The unfinished story rails for Crystal Crisis on Utapau were eventually released on StarWars.com, as well as a part of the Blu-ray release for the Clone Wars Season 6, The Lost Missions. The final entry of these most popular unfinished Clone Wars arcs that was eventually adapted and released as a part of the Clone Wars Legacy project is Dark Disciple. This Clone Wars story was originally intended for Season 7 as an 8-episode arc following fan favorite Asajj Ventress, providing the character with a fitting end. Well, sort of, but we'll get more into that later in the video. This arc would have seen the unlikely team-up of Ventress and Jedi Master Quinlan Vos on a mission from the Jedi Order to assassinate Count Dooku in an attempt to end the Clone Wars. This arc tackles themes of abandonment trauma, romance, the Force and the dark side, the fall of the Jedi Order, and ultimately redemption. Using the scripts for the unfinished episodes, a canon novel of the same title was released in 2015 by author Christie Golden, and I personally cannot recommend it enough. Asajj Ventress is also such a standout character from the Clone Wars series, with some even considering her the foil to Ahsoka Tano. Season 3 of the Clone Wars saw Ventress betrayed by Dooku, denounce the Sith, and return to her Night Sister roots on the path of revenge. Season 4 saw her become a lone bounty hunter, and then in Season 5 eventually assists in proving Ahsoka's innocence for the bombing of the Jedi Temple. Ventress was already on her path towards redemption in her final appearances in the Clone Wars Season 5, and Dark Disciple would have finally provided us with closure and a fitting end for the character, where I believe her actions display the characteristics of a true Jedi. All three of these unfinished arcs, Son of Dathomir, Crystal Crisis, and Dark Disciple, are the three that I believe are integral to the Clone Wars series as a whole, and it's a shame they were never released as originally intended, but the stories are definitely still worth revisiting. Another lesser-known unfinished arc that would provide much-needed context for the Bad Batch Season 1 and the Book of Boba Fett more importantly is the Bounty Hunter arc. This arc was an unfinished 4-episode story that would have revolved around the relationship between Boba Fett and Cad Bane, seeing them go on a mission along with other popular Clone Wars bounty hunters to rescue a child kidnapped by the Tusken Raiders, and ending in a climactic duel between the two. This duel would have provided an explanation for the metal plate Cad Bane has on his head in the Bad Batch Season 1, and the origin of the dent in Boba Fett's helmet. This arc would also give much needed context for their rematch in the Book of Boba Fett, since the events of the arc are alluded to in their dialogue from their past history. There's also a handful of other unfinished Clone Wars arcs mentioned by Dave Filoni and Pablo Hidalgo during the Untold Clone Wars panel at Celebration 2015 and Ahsoka's Untold Tales at Celebration 2016. While they're less integral to the series as a whole, I thought they were still worth mentioning. Perhaps the most exciting would have been the Return to the Jedi Temple arc, which would have taken place sometime after Ahsoka's decision to leave the Order. After discovering a threat in the Coruscant underworld and warning the Jedi, we would have seen Ahsoka team back up with Anakin and Obi-Wan to rescue Master Yoda from the Sith shrine deep below the temple. This arc would also show Ahsoka's first encounter with Darth Sidious, protecting and keeping him from entering the temple's holocron vault. Looking over the imagery, I'm curious if this arc or artwork inspired their encounter in Star Wars Rebels Season 4, Episode 13, A World Between Worlds. Some other unfinished arcs mentioned were a Return to Mon Cala, a Rex and R2 Top Gun inspired arc, and an X-Files inspired story including the Yuzong Vong. And I can't talk about unfinished Clone Wars arcs and providing closure for these characters and stories without mentioning Barriss Offee. Dave Filoni revealed during the Celebration 2015 Untold Clone Wars panel that Barriss was originally going to die at the end of Season 5, but he specifically cut that part since he didn't want that fate for her. At the time, he said he still had plans for Barriss, but we have yet to see her return. Not all of these arcs went unfinished though, and some stories were even adapted into future Star Wars media. The Clone Wars series was actually brought back in 2020 for a 7th and final season on Disney Plus, and included updated versions of the Bad Batch arc, Ahsoka's Walkabout arc, as well as the Siege of Mandalore arc. In 2015 at Celebration Anaheim, as a part of the Clone Wars Untold panel, Dave Filoni talked about a Kashyyyk arc that would have seen Yoda and his clone battalion fighting alongside the Wookiees against the separatist allied Trandoshans, with elements of this story later adapted and even referenced as having taken place previously in the Bad Batch Season 2 Episode 6, Tribe. Back in 2010, Dave Filoni mentioned the possibility of bringing back the Zillo Beast for the Clone Wars Season 7, and he eventually did in the Bad Batch Season 2, Episode 11, Metamorphosis. The Bad Batch's third and final season is also set to bring Asajj Ventress back from the dead, following her supposed death near the end of Dark Disciple. The trailer shows Ventress with an updated appearance and yellow lightsaber, similar to concept art from the original Untold Dark Disciple Clone Wars arc. How exactly she survived has yet to be revealed, but I've made a video with my theory, which you can check out at the link in the cards if you're interested. StarWars.com also put out an article about the Bad Batch Season 3 with a statement from series supervising director and executive producer Brad Rao stating, "We love Asajj Ventress. She's a character we've been wanting to tell more stories about. We don't want to spoil anything, but want fans to know that any new storytelling with Ventress will align with the events of Star Wars Dark Disciple, and they updated her databank entry to reflect this. So it seems like the majority, if not all of the Dark Disciple story will remain canon after all, and I'm very excited to see what, if any, events from the book are referenced in the Bad Batch. With this being the show's final season, I have a feeling this will also be the final Untold Clone Wars arc we see in some form or another. But with all of the unfinished arcs, Pablo Hidalgo explained, "Even though these Clone Wars episodes did not get publicly revealed, they still look at their core stories as having happened. And I believe that Disney and Lucasfilm are well aware of how marketable the Clone Wars series and its stories were and still are to the fans. Think about how many new Order 66 scenes we've seen since the series cancellation in media such as Jedi Fallen Order, The Bad Batch, The Book of Boba Fett, The Mandalorian, Obi-Wan Kenobi, multiple comics, and books even as recently as Inquisitor Rise of the Red Blade, which also spent a lot of time in the Clone Wars era. Disney and Lucasfilm know that fans are still interested in this time period. They've proved that by visiting it so many times throughout Star Wars media, so I wouldn't be surprised if we continue to see Clone Wars stories being told in the future. But with the Bad Batch series coming to an end in its third and final season, will it also serve as an ending for animated Clone Wars stories? Only time will tell, and as much as I don't want to see Clone Wars storytelling come to an end, I do think it's time for Star Wars animation to explore a new era. A new era could also bring with it a new Star Wars animation style, and even though I don't mind the Clone Wars animation, I know there are a ton of Star Wars fans who are tired of it, and maybe all this era needs is just a nice long break. Between the original trilogy era, sequel era, High Republic, and the Old Republic, which Star Wars era would you like to see Star Wars animation explore next? Let me know down in the comments below or join my Discord to continue the conversation there. Make sure to like, subscribe, and consider following me on social media at Scotty Holiday SW for all my latest Star Wars content. Thank you all so much for watching, and as always, may the Force be with you.